Hey there, it's Robin, and you're listening to Healthy Habits for a Healthier Home. I'm here to help you create a healthier life, one simple shift at a time. If you're a mama ready to ditch toxins, clean up your family's nutrition, and build daily habits that support your well-being, you're definitely in the right place. Each episode is packed not only with education, but practical tips and tools to help you transform your health and your home without that feeling of overwhelm. So let's take this journey together to create a thriving, low-tox home for you and your family. If you're ready, say, I am ready. Now let's get into this episode. Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm super excited to introduce you guys to Jen Yundt Coles. I just knew I had to have her on the podcast because she really talks about certain subjects that I know are going to be of interest to all of us, whether it's for ourselves or our families. And so welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Hey, Robin. I'm really excited about our chat today. We have so much in common, and I know that we'll kind of just meander and dive in.
Absolutely. So for everybody listening who doesn't know you quite yet, what was part of your journey that started you down the rabbit hole of going in the direction of like SIBO and things like that?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a big question. And I'll start by just saying, in case anyone doesn't know, SIBO stands for Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth, SIBO. And I got to this place because of a lifelong journey. So I started out as a child, always had stomach aches. My parents really didn't know how to help me. It was always constipated and frustrated and miserable. And then as I got into my teens, you start kind of learning how to self-medicate. And so, it was Pepto and Mylanta and ibuprofen before school and all of that kind of stuff. And just kind of like thought it was my normal, right? Because it was every day of my life. And I just thought, this is what I'm going to have to live with. And I just need to know how to manage it, right? It wasn't until I got to college and then moving on from there that I realized there were things such as lactose intolerant and wheat and gluten allergies and all of these kind of things that I hadn't been aware of before. So I started to implement things like changing my diet and that sort of thing. And actually at the time when I was in my early 20s, I had a beautiful roommate who was diagnosed with celiac disease at that time. So that really opened my mind to more alternative outside of the box thinking for digestive health. So from there, I was kind of still managing even as a newlywed and having my babies back to back, which really threw me into kind of an autoimmune kind of a picture and dealing with fatigue and body pain and all of that, along with the digestive issues. And because I'm sort of what I like to call a go-getter or like a high achiever type person, I'm always looking for a new project or something new. I was kind of a serial entrepreneur for a while, for a couple of decades, being exposed to different chemicals in the workplace, high stress situations with work, with babies, and starting my own businesses and things like that. The stress eventually caught up with me. And this is what I like to call my rock bottom moment. But before leading up to this, I remember vividly just laying in bed one day, not wanting to leave my bed, miserable, in pain, not sure if I could take my kids to their travel soccer game because where's the next bathroom kind of situation, struggling with migraines. My hormones were all out of whack and all this kind of stuff. And I just remember kind of laying there thinking, oh my gosh, dear God, is this what there is for me? Am I just going to shrivel up here? Like I have a life to live. My kids are counting on me. There has to be more, is basically what the question was.
I love that. And I think just from like the way society has been for so many decades, and I do feel a shift coming, but I do think that we are conditioned and taught just to suppress the symptoms. Yep. And again, our body is super wise, so it will take it for a little bit and then something else will pop up, right? And yep. Then something else. But it's like
the story of my life.
For most,
always popping up.
Right. But for most people, it's when a very stressful event happens in their life, whether it's having a baby, a death in the family, a divorce, something really traumatic or life altering,
Yeah.
that stress just takes your body down. And then it is that rock bottom. But I want to help people prevent having to get to that rock bottom, right? That's
Yeah,
why I believe in what we
exactly.
do, because we're educating people on things that they might not be aware of yet. There's
Yeah.
multiple digestive issue things. And if you can catch it sooner, you might not end up with SIBO per se,
Yeah.
but there are different things that, our body just kind of keeps going down until, we do hit that rock bottom. So
Yeah.
your story is familiar. That's what I'm trying to say. It's familiar
Yeah.
to, I think, a lot of listeners. It's familiar to me in a way. I didn't have SIBO, but I have Epstein-Barr just from having mono. And it's like, until I had a very stressful moment and situation happen, I was just keeping it at bay and just living in that
Yeah.
fight or flight, and then my body was like, you're done. You're going down. And,
Yeah.
it took me 2 years to like flip everything back around. And I'm very conscious now about boundaries and stress and not to say you never have stress in your life, right? But it's how do you manage it, right? Because everybody's going to have stress. If you have a stress-free life, you're not living. I mean, just because if
Yeah.
it's not your stress, it's your kid's stress or your husband's stress or your family's stress or your mother's, it's like there's stress all around you. So it is how you take it in, how you manage it, and how you let it go. But with SIBO, I think it's an interesting health issue because it's a small bacteria, it's small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. So explain to people, how does that actually happen?
Yeah, so that's going to kind of lead me. I'm going to circle back
Yeah,
and finish
absolutely.
kind of my rock bottom there, just to kind
Yeah,
of give you a context of how this could happen for you, right?
please do.
So, speaking of all that stress, like you said, a big event or something like that, well, I ended up with broken heart syndrome, and that's Takotsubo myocarditis. It's a really long phrase there, but basically, it was extreme stress, grief, and
Mhm.
it took its toll on my body, right? And that included this digestive issue that didn't realize that I had at the time. I had methane SIBO, which is one type of SIBO that causes constipation. Um, and so really that's a huge message that I share with my clients and when I'm speaking on a podcast, right? Is to share the message of the role of stress in our lives and how that can lead to something like SIBO, for instance, right? It can lead to many things, of course. We know that our bodies will store it in all kinds of ways and manifest itself in different ways, but SIBO is one. And this happens because, well, normally we have a variety of bacteria in the large colon, right? I
Mhm.
know that you recently had one of my favorite friends and colleagues, Amy Spindle, on your show. And she basically like gave my talk about gut health, right?
It's okay.
But
We need to
but
hear it
she's
from multiple people in
she's
multiple
amazing.
ways.
Yeah, yeah, she's amazing. But basically, you have this microbiome in your large colon, and it's supposed to be really diverse, and that's where you're fermenting your fibers and your heavier carbs and things like that. And that's normal. That's what you want. And your small intestine is more like what I call the sorter or the secretary, and that's where you're assimilating all your nutrients, you're absorbing those nutrients, getting it out of the bloodstream into your cells so they can be utilized. And although the small intestine isn't what I would call sterile, it is mostly a sterile environment, especially compared to the large colon. And so many things can happen. And like I said, stress is one, because what happens is when we're in that fight or flight, like you were just saying, our body is in survival mode, and digestion and elimination is not on the top of the list of things to do, right? You are trying to run from the tiger, you don't have time to digest your meal. And what happens is something called the migrating motor complex, which is that muscle contraction movement throughout the intestinal tract. It starts to slow down or gets impaired in some way. And so you could have bacteria from the large colon migrating up, and or you have excess food fodder in the small intestines that's hanging out there longer than it should be, and it becomes a buffet for bacteria to feed on, and it's starting to ferment. And then you're getting symptoms like bloating, gas, and changes in your bowel habits. It can lead to inflammation and leaky gut, which I'm sure you've talked about on your show before, and the downstream effects of that, right? So that could end up like autoimmunity, cardiovascular disease, brain fog, rashes, all sorts of things. So it's really important to kind of make sure that our migrating motor complex, for one, is working properly, that we're managing our stress, because like you said, we can't really get away from it. It's around everywhere, every day, right? But learning how to balance it with, moments of joy and laughter and peace and quiet and things like that, that are really important for us to be able to reset it back into parasympathetic nervous system dominance, which is what we like to call rest and digest or healing mode.
So
And
I want to talk just for a
yeah,
second because I think it's important. I think a lot of us have heard of fight or flight, and freeze is a new term that's kind of being thrown in there. And I think they are things that need to be learned. But there's also, we do need to be able to sort of like go through all of them, because if there is something chasing us, or if there is an emergency in your home, like you have to go up, like you gotta be able to flight basically, and like figure something stressful out. And I think some people get confused in thinking like that should never happen to me. I should always just be in my parasympathetic rest or digest, and that's not true. There's like a window of tolerance. You've got to be
right.
able to kind of go up and down. And so, what can you talk just a little bit about the window of tolerance and how that actually works, so that people can hear it and
Yeah,
understand it?
yeah. So there's this really good book about, I forget what it's called now, something about why zebras never get ulcers or something like that.
Okay, I'll look it up and put it in the show notes.
Clients, be like a zebra. So you think about it this way, and it's a kind of a good visual for those of us who like to have that imagery in our mind. So say you're on the safari, or like out in the savannah or wherever zebras are living, right? And they're eating their grass and they're doing their thing. And at that moment, they're in parasympathetic. Well, here comes the tiger or the lion or whatever that's going to attack them. And they have to have a burst of energy to run away. And they go right into sympathetic nervous system dominance, right? And that is their survival mode. They're running to get away, they are flighting. And once they get to a safe space, right, there's this window of time where they're in that survival mode in order to save their lives, right? That's imperative. That's important. We do that as humans. We need that, like you said, have that moment of time where we can elevate and get something done or make a decision. Um, the zebra will find a safe place, they find a new bush or a new tree or whatever it is that they're eating, and they go back to eating in that. And while they are resetting, they'll kind of shake out their body. It's kind of like if
Mm,
you're a dog and someone comes to your door and they get all like crazy and then they shake it out right after.
yep.
That's what we're supposed to be doing. We need to have that moment of reset. And unfortunately, our culture, and especially as busy moms, we don't necessarily give ourselves permission to reset on a regular basis like we should, and really
I
kind of
think it's also
that
super important to
window.
teach your kids that. I think
Yeah.
it's something that we as adults need to learn, but we also need to teach young to old, our kids, that the shaking is the release, especially if you are somebody that suffers from, high anxiety, or
Yeah.
just, being ramped up and not being able to come down, or then you come down hard. It's like these are tools to use. And the shaking out is a great tool. So
Mhm.
if you are somebody who has never done that and find yourself in a situation, you can do it wherever. You just kind of like shake yourself. And it is interesting you bring up the dog thing, because when we did have our boxer, it was like when people came over, we had to send him in the backyard, let him do a couple laps, get it all out, and then come back in and he'd be calm, and
Yeah.
it's the same thought process. While you were talking, I did look up the book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it is a guide to stress related disease, and coping. And
Yeah.
I think that's, yeah, I'm definitely getting that book to read, because I think it's an
Yeah, it's a good
interesting.
one.
Yeah, it looks like it is. So thank you for bringing that up. So when we have that rise and that fall, and we don't fall, like we don't come down into the parasympathetic, and we're just always in that heightened state. I mean, we can all imagine sort of what can happen inside your body, but what are some things you've learned, in your practice, that you've seen people go through, when they don't have the tools and the skills to be
Yeah.
able to have that window of up and down?
Yeah, so that list is quite long, but some of the more common things that I see, especially among mothers and women in general, is impaired sleep.
Mm.
So our cortisol wave gets dysregulated when we're constantly in fight or flight. And then when you think about that, that's our healing time in general, right? So then you're going to have other things popping up when your sleep starts to fail, right? If you're not getting optimal deep sleep every night. And hormone dysregulation is a big one. So we start seeing metabolic dysfunction and gaining weight and, fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone as well. A decrease in testosterone. Women have testosterone too. This is what gives us our drive, right? And our mojo kind of thing. And there's a decrease in that as well. You can start seeing things like rashes because your body is starting to accumulate toxins because it's not eliminating properly. Like maybe your lymph is getting clogged, or, that's not a technical term, but you know what I mean, right? And
Yep.
not eliminating through stool and urine properly, or even sweating enough. And those toxins have to figure out a way to get out. So then they start coming out through the skin, whether that's acne or rashes and things like that. Speaking of that, sometimes we get ourselves into a situation where it looks like some autoimmunity is starting. So your body decides which place it's going to, choose as the victim. So it could be a joint or it could be an organ. You can start having things like inflammatory dynamics going on, right? And your body attacking itself because it's trying to survive. It's not because your body is doing something wrong. It's doing what it's programmed to do to try to save you. Unfortunately, it comes with a whole, side dish of side effects, right?
Yeah.
And so there are many things that can show up, but mostly in my practice, I see the sleep, I see the rashes. Of course, I'm dealing with lots of digestive issues in my particular practice. Mood imbalances all over the place. Anxiety for sure is on the top of the list. Depression, just swinging back and forth, not being able to focus, having that cognitive impairment going on, like if it's a working woman, they're really struggling at work, or being able to multitask with everything that's going on in their daily life, it becomes even more difficult. So there's a whole host of things that can happen when we're stuck in that place. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those are familiar things to a lot of people, especially, women,
Yeah.
young, old, with small kids, with old kids, it doesn't matter, because I feel like there's a point in your life where you can put your head down. Not that it's, not that I'm advising this, but there is a point where because our bodies are a little more resilient and they haven't like lived a lot of years, but we can kind of put the head down and grind through things. And that's,
Yeah.
for me, I felt like that way when I had smaller children, but it was like, what isn't a good idea? Because then as the kids and you're getting older, like you're just not able to do that anymore. And then you just feel like, what is happening? But really, it's been happening all along. So that's another kind of point I wanted to bring up, is that these things don't just happen overnight. They are a buildup and a
Yeah.
breakdown, because our body is wise and it can heal if given half the chance. But when it's not given that chance, eventually it is just a machine. It is going to start breaking down. So what I heard you say as being number one is sleep. And I think setting yourself up for good sleep patterns is something that has shifted in the last couple of decades. Once the iPhone came out, once the TV's in the bedrooms, once, staying up till midnight after the kids are in bed so you can get your stuff done because maybe you're working or whatever and you don't want to take away from the kids' time. Like there's a lot of patterns within the sleep dynamic, I feel like, that has shifted again over the last few decades. So when, I mean, I have a spiel about like what I think is appropriate for like a sleep environment, but I'd love to hear your take on that, because I can always learn something new and so can my audience.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sleep is actually really such an interesting topic for me personally, but I see it as a problem in my practice often. But I'll just share kind of a little bit of a personal story where, you know how you were saying things just keep popping up to like give you the message to slow down.
Yep.
And for me, I had an accident several years ago. I was doing a home renovation project and blacked out because, I'm just running on empty, and blacked out, fell back, hit my head, split it open on a quartz countertop. Luckily,
Mm.
my son was home that day and found me and called 911, and I had to be stapled up. Well, that led me into a year of dealing with concussion symptoms. And
Mm.
one of the biggest things that came out of that was sleep disruption for me. It really dysregulated my whole cortisol melatonin pattern. And it took a really long time for me to kind of reset that. And then once I was finally resetting it for about good 3 or 4 months, then last year on New Year's Eve, I was hit by a drunk driver.
Oh,
So then here I
geez.
was again back in concussion land. So the sleep is a really important topic for me personally, but also something that I talk a lot about in my practice. And what that looks like is really giving yourself one permission. It's okay to freaking get some rest. You know what I'm saying?
Amen.
Because we don't really give ourselves permission to do that. And I don't know, it's shifting a little bit. We're getting a little bit out of that hustle culture, which is awesome.
Yes.
For me personally, I grew up in a military family, and the messaging was kind of like, well, you know, if you're resting or taking a nap, you're weak or you're lazy or you're just not being productive, you know, like a member of society, right?
Yeah.
And so I've had to do a lot of reprogramming on that. So I talk about that in my practice. Let's reprogram that messaging, those stories you're telling yourself about giving yourself a break. For me, that looks like after dinner and after cleanup and hanging out with my children. You know, my kids know that I go to my room and that's my time. And so I have a really nice bathtub. I manifested that for myself. I felt like it was really important for my whole nighttime routine to have a really hot bath in Epsom salts. I listen to music. I also play music, so that's very calming to me. I also journal and write songs or poems. For me, that's kind of a process to calm down in the night. For some people, that might rev them up, right? Everyone is different.
Yep.
Definitely no screens and things like that. I'm a big proponent of, you know, no screens at night. It's just it programs your brain to think it's like 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So there's like no way you're gonna go to sleep, right?
Yep.
Um, and you know, I have blackout shades and an eye mask. I have a noise machine. I have the whole thing going on in my room. I have a pink salt lamp. I even have an adjustable bed because my room is my space and that's my place where I can reset. And for me, that whole grounding and relaxing and unplugging is how I'm going to get my best sleep. I
I
don't
love
think
that.
it's
The last thing you
practical.
said, it's
Yeah.
not practical, but what I love that you just said is the unplugging. So
Yeah.
unplugging is going to look different for everybody. And it might look like what you do, and it might look a little bit different, but you have to be present enough to feel unplugged. So,
Yes.
you know, if you're looking at social media screens, whatever, as you're like getting into bed and drifting off, your brain is going like you're not disconnected. And that's, I think people think they can just turn it off and then their brain, but it's like your brain needs downtime. It's kind of like when they're a baby. It's like you give them a bottle, you read them a book. There's like, it's in the dark. It's like you're prepping your body for sleep. And
Yeah.
we have forgotten how to do that because of being on 24/7. So if nothing else, I want to give people permission to not be on 24/7. If you're
Yes.
somebody who struggles with that, you have to build that boundary for yourself because we're not productive. I think we think we're being, and I have this conversation with my husband very often. It's like you think you're being productive but you're never giving your brain a break. So you're less productive. You're just spinning your wheels.
Scattered.
Yeah, it's very scattered. It's like 10 years ago, maybe even longer now, but it's like you got up, you took a shower, you had your morning sort of, whether even it was 30 minutes before you headed out the door, then you drove to work, you know, whether you were singing or whatever, you know, or sitting in traffic, but there was no connection to work until you
Yeah.
got to work.
Right.
And now it's like people wake up and they're working the second they put their feet on the floor because immediately they're checking their emails. And so I want to give people permission to create boundaries for yourself around this so that you can get better sleep, so that you can learn how to get into that rest and digest state. And it'll be weird at first if you're not someone who does it, right? It'll feel uncomfortable, it'll feel foreign, but the more, you know, the more you do it. And that's when I talk about like the 1% shifts. If you're somebody who's on till you go to bed, do one thing, you know, remove your phone.
Exactly.
You know, it's like do a second thing after that's kind of in place and you feel good about it. It's like you don't have to revamp everything, but if you don't start, again, you're going to hit that rock bottom at some point, and then you're going to be forced to because the outcome isn't going to look good, you know? So
Right. if you don't mind, I'm going to swing back around to
Absolutely.
where we
Yeah.
were leaving that as what's not practical, right? And so, yeah, expecting that you've had your crazy insane day and then all of a sudden, oops, it's 10:30, I better be in bed, lights out. Like you can't just automatically turn your brain off. Like
Right.
most people can't, especially women. I think we're programmed to have like the spaghetti brain that everything is connecting.
Yep.
And it's also not practical for anyone in your audience to just like say, oh my gosh, well, Jen has all these gadgets in her room to help her sleep, right? I mean,
Right.
that's just me personally. That's what I like to do, create kind of a spa atmosphere in there, and that makes me feel special, right?
Right.
But
But
that
you didn't
doesn't
go out
work
in
for
one day and purchase all that. That was over
Right.
time as you discovered, oh, I think I like that. And that's the whole 1% shift. It's like you don't have to do everything at once, but just take one step forward
exactly.
just to begin the change.
Yeah, one step at a time for sure. And going back to what we were talking about too, you know, at night when we're sleeping and when we're in deep sleep is when our migrating motor complex also turns on. So it's like the cleansing wave. It's like when the trash gets taken out. So if you're staying up till 1 or 2 and missing those prime hours of sleep between like 11 and 1, you're missing that opportunity to have that cleansing wave. If you're staying up late and eating food and self-medicating with emotional eating, right? You're turning that migrating motor complex off. And if you're waking up too early, right? If you're not getting that good chunk of, that sleep cycle going through that at least twice, you're likely not getting that cleansing wave or that migrating motor complex process to clean out excess bacteria, for instance. And that feeds into the whole thing then, because then you have these microbes that are sending the message to your brain, oh, it's not safe here, I'm anxious. And then it continues. It's a forward feeding cycle.
Yeah, that sounds interesting and spot on. When you talk about like nighttime routine, when people say don't eat 2 hours before you go to bed, it's because you can't sleep and digest at the same time. The minor motor complex, that works while you're sleeping. But if your body's trying to digest and sleep and do that, it just can't, the functionality
there has to be a period of fasting. Yeah.
Correct. There has to be something in between that's like downtime, which is fasting. So again, I think it's important just to see like when do you stop eating and when do you go to bed, and it doesn't have to be exact, but the more you can separate that time, the better for, again, your sleep. And then we all know that sleep is, like you said, most important in all aspects. Sleep
That's the interesting thing too. I just wanted to add this too, Robin. It's not all about the nighttime routine, right? So when you wake up in the morning, it's important to get that sunshine in your eyeballs to reset that whole circadian.
Before you look at your phone.
Yes, before you look at your phone. And there's so many like popular influencers and self-help type gurus out there that, are big proponents of leaving your phone in another room so you're not even tempted. And for some of us, that's kind of difficult to do. But like you said, it's one step at a time. What can I implement today that might help me have a better night's sleep? And then that's going to improve your digestion. So yeah, our whole conversation went to sleep, but
I know, but it's important because to offset some of the digestive issues, I think that is an important piece to understand and know about. And so when you're not doing those things and you're not adding, the value to your sleep and you have a lot of digestive issues, what is the difference between SIBO, for people who don't know, and IBD and IBS? Because I know those 3 terms are thrown around a lot and people are like, I don't understand the difference.
Yeah. Oh, that's an awesome question. Okay. So, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. This is sort of a generic catch-all diagnosis that conventional medicine will give someone if they don't understand what is causing the digestive issues or symptoms for that person that's sitting in front of them. It's kind of a vague, excuse for a diagnosis, in my opinion. I'm just going to call it out.
Yeah, I agree.
And interestingly, new studies are always coming out, but upwards of 60 to 80% of people who get that diagnosis of IBS from their doctor actually have SIBO at play. And again, SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's bacteria in the small intestine that shouldn't be there, and it's overgrown and it's acting like a bully and causing all these problems. IBS generally is just like, oh, am I having constipation? Am I having diarrhea? Am I having gas and bloating? Is it alternating? And it's pretty, tight in that diagnosis. And SIBO, for instance, though, can manifest itself in so many different ways, but the more common digestive issues are gas and bloating, especially an hour and a half to 2 hours after you eat in that area underneath the navel and the small intestinal area. If you're feeling it there and you're like, oh, I've got my pooch, it's back, I can't tighten my, button my jeans or whatever, that could be a clue that SIBO's at play. And it can also look like diarrhea or constipation or alternating. And it gets tricky because some people will be constipated, right? And they're taking lots of laxatives, so now they're getting diarrhea. So it's really unclear what's going on for them. So it's important to test. Test, not guess. I know I've heard other guests on your show say that.
Yep.
It's really important. Yeah. And IBD is more of an inflammatory, well, it's inflammatory bowel disease, right? And so this is when you have like colitis and actual damage to the intestinal lining. And that can cause things like diarrhea, pain, cramping, gas, bloating, and other ways. But more so, it's just the irritated intestinal feeling. Like if you eat something and you're getting like hot spots, like I like to call them. And diarrhea is probably the more common bowel movement associated with that. You can have IBD and SIBO at the same time. I see that in my practice. And really the goal there is to heal the intestinal lining, get through those advanced biofilm layers to remove overgrowths. If you don't do that first, they'll just stick around and they keep coming back. That's why a lot of people relapse with SIBO. And then really thinking about how can I continue to heal, support my immune system, and also repair, right? So that you are able to repair that lining in both conditions, IBD and something like SIBO. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's a clear picture of a lot of confusion because a lot of them overlap symptom wise. So I think it is important to get with a practitioner, functional or regular, that understands the three very well to be able to help decipher which one of the three is possible. And there is testing, obviously, for SIBO. The other thing I wanted to just ask, just out of curiosity, is where does Candida fit into all this? Because Candida is an overgrowth of yeast.
Fungal overgrowth.
Right, which we all have Candida, but if it is gone wild, it causes you to crave sugar. My daughter had it. It causes you to crave carbs because that's what feeds those bacteria. But where does that fit into the SIBO and the IBD and the IBS?
Yeah. So Candida, like you said, is a commensal type of fungi that we have normally in our intestinal tract. And when it's in check, it's perfectly fine when everything is coexisting. When it does overgrow, the thing that's tricky about it is it can create a very advanced biofilm layer in the intestinal tract. And that can then create an atmosphere or an environment or real estate, really, for other things to be hiding out in. So bacteria, parasites, and other fungal overgrowths like mold and things like that. I see in my practice so much Candida overgrowth go hand in hand with SIBO. They're like besties, and they're often there at the same time. And a savvy practitioner will understand that and be able to know how to proceed as far as a quote unquote treatment plan goes. And for me, I'm not using antibiotics. I don't prescribe. I'm not a doctor, but I'm using a lot of herbals and homeopathics and key nutrients to target those things. And I like to use things that are going to address both at the same time, a fungal and a bacterial overgrowth. And I like to shoot that bird with those two birds with one stone.
Because usually they do kind of coexist.
They do coexist very often. Yeah. And especially with hydrogen sulfide type, which is my specialty within the realm of SIBO. It's a lesser understood type of SIBO, where there's a sulfur overload basically in the body, and it's quite toxic to your body, those sulfites. And that one especially is really common to be a co-infection with Candida. Yep.
Interesting. Okay, I did not know that. That's good to know. What I found super interesting about Candida, so my younger daughter definitely she's just born sensitive. Like she just has a lot of sensitivities to things. And, first we discovered red dye to be a trigger for her with behavioral issues and things. But then around 13, I don't even, around when COVID, when we were in lockdown, I just was like, I don't know if she's hyperactive. Like something's up. Like she can't, there's impulsivities. And I knew it wasn't the ice because we didn't ingest any, but I'm like, something's happening. So, I contacted the pediatrician and they're half holistic, half Western. So he's like, well, before we diagnose anything, let's do a stool test and a neurotransmitter test.
Good. Yeah.
And so that was my first kind of step into this like new world of like, wow, like that's so cool that you can see all of this and how your gut and your neurotransmitters talk to each other and how they're affected and all of that. And she's like, she definitely has Candida overgrowth, and obviously we just did all natural things, but within 2 weeks she was like a different person. And so
gosh, yeah.
it's like with kids, we always want to go to something's wrong with them, and it's like, yeah, I mean, there is, but a lot of times their behavior is not a reflection of them wanting to behave that way. There's something that's triggering it. And those are the things that I feel like I walked through to figure out, like, you have to be an advocate for your own self. Like you have to speak up for yourself and explain how you feel and you got to keep pounding the pavement until you find the practitioners that really align with your mama gut. Because when your kids have something wrong, it's really hard to just trust. There's been a lot of, for me, at least, there's been a lot of walls of mistrust built up. And so I'm skeptical and I'm not skeptical of like the natural things, right? But I'm skeptical of like, well, why are you going to use this drug? Not that I'm against drugs, but explain to me why this is the best route. And if you can give me hardcore evidence, I'll think about it, but it's like, you got to be able to like really tell me how it's going to solve the problem. Because a lot of times to me, that just masks the problem. And I think, again, detoxing, we've never been taught does not talked about. Like I didn't go to school. When I went to school, we didn't talk about like doing a yearly detox or every quarter or whatever. My mom never even, just wasn't a thing, right? And we think it needs to come more into the mainstream, because if we could detox some of these pesticides, herbicides, things, environmental factors that we have no control over at this point, if we could do that more regularly, maybe people wouldn't end up all the way over here after years and years and years of just whipping our bodies, So it's definitely interesting, but I am fascinated by the gut. I'm fascinated by gut health and how that can affect your brain. I think there's a huge correlation. So if you could talk a little bit about that gut brain connection, I think, we can all learn something about that. Because
what you just said was so full of juiciness. Just like taking mental notes, like, oh, I want to say something about that. Okay, so first, the gut-brain connection, we have this vagus nerve. That's the superhighway of communication between the brain and the gut, and there are different nervous systems there. And once upon a time, we used to think that it was the brain communicating with the gut just one way, but now we know it's actually way more communication coming from the gut to the brain. And it's constantly a survey of what our environment is. Are we safe? Are we not safe? What's going on? And so our microbes are essentially in charge. So it doesn't really surprise me when I hear something like, well, we found out that my daughter had Candida and she was having all these behavioral issues and she was hyperactive or couldn't focus or whatever it was. And then once you kind of reset her microbiome, she was back to her old self, right? And I think this is huge for children, especially in our world of sugar being added to everything, and all these processed foods that really just take out the nutrients for healing in general, right? And so it's really setting us up, especially our children at a young age, for having these sorts of conditions, which lead to kind of mental imbalances sometimes or emotional imbalances. And we feel like we're out of control because it's our microbes wanting things and craving sugars and carbs, and we don't have that like quote unquote willpower to like not eat those things. And especially as children, if they're not getting guidance from their parents, they don't know better, right? They just know what they want. And so we know that even for women, especially, we've got a lot of extra things in the mix, including our hormones, and they're always shifting, especially on a monthly basis for some of us, right? And all of this is at play with metabolic function, mood balance, sex hormone production, digestion and elimination, whether or not we're sleeping, what's our activity level, do we feel fatigued, do we have enough energy, all this kind of stuff. And it all goes together. And, I'm looking at it through the lens of gut health, right? It's really starting there with what's going on with our microbiome there. Now I'm forgetting what your exact question was because I think maybe I went on a tangent, but I think
No, it's fine.
the important part of the message that I wanted to share was, as mamas, we do have to be our kids' best advocate, right? We do have to push back a little bit and ask more questions. I always did that to our pediatrician, and I don't know if she liked me very much, but I got the care for my kids that they needed, right? And that's part of our mama superpower, is that we're always going to leave no stone unturned when it comes to our children and what's going on with their health and well-being. And I always encourage people to do that. But also as mothers, as we're multitasking, are we working? Are we at home? Are we both? Shuffling here and there and being a chauffeur and making the meals and the cleaning and all the things. It's so much stuff in our brain. And if we don't have this foundational health in our gut first, to give the communication to our brain that we are in a safe environment and it's okay to take care of things one at a time. It's okay to take time out to rest. We don't have to run for the tiger for the next, 15 minutes. We can sit and be quiet for a minute and get our game plan on, because we have so much going on. We really need to have that gut health in check so that we can have a clear mind in order to make good decisions. And speaking of that, when we have this kind of microbial imbalance in our gut, and we are getting that signal of panic and anxiety and everything to our brain, we're not able to make good decisions for our self-healing journey or for our children. So it's kind of again, a forward feeding cycle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's all very true and accurate. And I like how, when you're speaking of, what we can do for our kids and then what we can do for ourselves, because I think there is two different situations happening. But if you're not taking care of yourself, it's really hard to show up in your best version for anybody else in your family. And
Yeah.
I learned that the hard way. But I do think we also have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable of asking the questions at the doctor's appointments and getting that "I don't like you" kind of a face, like, who are you? Why are you asking me
Yeah.
these things? I mean, I'm sure there's a few people who don't like me, but that's okay, because my job is not for you to like me. My job is to make sure I'm in the right place for the health of my kids. And if I'm not, I need to move to the different location, to the next step. I'm not staying with the same person if they're not helping me in a way that is helping my kids. And
Yeah.
so I think you have to be okay with not being okay that everybody's going to like you, and think that, you're a good or not good mom. It doesn't matter. Like, that's up to you to decide. But again, I do think that self-care for us as women and moms gets put to the side when there is something else going on. And I just want to remind people that you've got to put those things into place in order to show up for your best self to your other people in your family.
Yeah.
And, the gut brain connection is definitely coming more to like the surface of things, but the microbiome is really new. It's not something that's 100 years old studied. Like, it's actually more on the newer side. And I do think there's a lot of links to some of the just, the rise in anxiety, depression, things like that. And that's what's lacking. I think that needs to come more to the mainstream of, like, maybe you need a medication to help stabilize, but what else are you doing? Like, it's a tool, but you need to get to the root cause of where's that imbalance coming from. And most likely it is your gut or something else in your body, whether it's inflammation. There's different factors, but there's testing for all of that. And unfortunately, that doesn't always come through your mainstream doctor. So it does cost out of your pocket. And for some, that's not feasible, which I think is absurd and unfair. But then I also have the conversation of, you can pay for it now if you can afford it, obviously. And even if it's a stretch, or you can live with
Pay for it later.
but also live with this insanity of what's happening in your household. And so I think there's, and again, I think it's a conversation that just hasn't had enough airtime. And I told my husband, I'm like, why do we have insurance? Like, we don't even use it, because nothing that we ever do is paid for under insurance.
Yeah.
And we need it for like emergency. I'm like, I get it, but it's frustrating. It's frustrating that I can't do anything preventative. God forbid it gets covered by insurance. I just think hopefully somewhere in this time of my living that will start to flip a little bit.
Well,
But
that's the mission of people like us, right? We're trying
yes,
to shift the conversation and empower each other
yeah.
to, push for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like, the gut is something. Obviously, I talk a lot about food sensitivity, like food dyes and glyphosate and things like the environmental factors that we don't, but we do have control over, right? We don't have control what's in every product and every food, but we do have a choice in what we purchase. And it's not always more expensive to buy things that are healthier. But also, if you're not buying 5 bags of cookies, if you're just buying one healthier version, then you have enough left over to buy different vegetables or something just to feed the microbiome. And that's what I wanted to talk, if you don't mind, just a few minutes on is
Yeah.
when we're talking about feeding our microbiome, what are we always hear prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic, and I think supplementation can be a good thing if needed. But I always try to encourage people, where can you get that in real food? Even though I know our food's not nutrient dense because of our soil and I get all that, but it's still something more than just taking the pill and eating the ultra processed food. So what are some pre, pro, and postbiotic foods that people can start to think about to incorporate into their daily life?
Yeah, that's such an important question. I'm actually glad that you brought that up because something you said earlier, and we were talking about sugar in kids. This is something that I have taught my own kids that now I see being reflected back to me as they're going off to college now, which I love. As they're, my younger son texted me and said, "Mom, I just wanted to show you this picture. I've got all the colors on my plate." And I was like, yes, mom win right there,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Really thinking about how to increase colors, eating the rainbow is like the number one way, in my opinion. You're getting those rich phytonutrients, polyphenols that are going to feed your good bacteria in your colon. Of course, things like different types of fibers, right? And this gets really tricky in my practice because with SIBO, those are often triggers. So sometimes we have to make shifts in the diet in order to accommodate that or to kind of get some relief for a temporary amount of time for that person before they can reintroduce those foods. But of course, cruciferous vegetables, and as women, we know this is a huge at the top of the list. Cruciferous vegetables are also going to help us not only with fiber and growing a good bacteria in the colon for, elimination and all that kind of stuff, but reduces our risk of colon cancer, also helps clear out excess estrogens that may be getting accumulated in the body. And that's really key as women. Things like resistant starches, obviously, those are really good. Root vegetables and squashes. I love talking about those in my practice. Right now it's the winter, so you can get all kinds of root vegetables. Really great for creating a diverse microbial environment in the large colon as well. And usually tend to be easier on the digestion than things like broccoli and cauliflower, especially for SIBO folks. But like I said, thinking about how can I increase my variety of vegetables, sometimes we get in this little rut where we're eating like the same three things, like, maybe carrots and broccoli and, name one more, right? The thing
Green
that
beans.
right, green beans, having the same ones over and over. And there's an amazing doctor out there, Dr. Harlach. He's a microbial genius, and he often recommends things like, you don't have to go on all these probiotic supplementation. Just eat 40 to 50 different types of produce every week. And when you think about that at first, it might seem overwhelming. But if you were to sit down and think about, well, what am I having vegetables and fruit every day? How can I mix up that variety or go to the store and challenge myself this week? What's one new vegetable I'm going to try? One
Yep.
thing at a time, right? That's how
Yep.
I work with my clients. And yeah,
I
and
think
I
it's
mean,
also, I think it's also a good minute to bring up like seasonal eating, because back in the day we didn't have the same vegetable 24 hours a day,
yeah,
365 days a year. It was like this grew at this season, this grew at this season. Like you said, winter is root vegetable. Like there is a reason why farming was like that, because then you did kind of have a diverse population of bacteria being fed to yourself over the course of seasons rather than every single day feeling like, so again, if It's the 1% shift, right? So just add a vegetable in maybe that you don't, but also just look at how you roll. Is it the same 3 or 4 vegetables every week? Do you flip it, and I get it. You maybe buying 40 different ones a week might seem
Yeah.
overkill,
It's not that's not practical for most people.
but it's
Yeah.
just something to be aware of, right? It's something to be aware of that in 30 days, it's like a challenge almost. Like in 30 days, that's 4 weeks of quote unquote grocery shopping. How many different varieties can you get and what matches the season? And I think that in itself can really boost. And again, if you're really deficient, then I think that on top of a supplement could be a good idea.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's not the end all. Just like drugs are not the end all, neither is a supplement. It's a tool in your tool belt that needs to be incorporated into your life, a newer lifestyle or a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah, 100%. And I was just thinking about this morning, actually, the awesomeness of Mother Nature, who brings us different produce at different times of year for different reasons, right? So we have all of our citrus and everything coming, harvesting in the winter because we need that extra vitamin C, or like in the spring when asparagus is popping up, right? Asparagus is a wonderful astringent and it's kind of a cleanser. So you can kind of take advantage of that action after a long winter of eating maybe heavier foods than, for the rest of the year and things like that. And then of course in the summer, we have all these hydrating fruits, like really fresh, juicy types of varieties that give you extra hydration and things like that. So really thinking about how, even like you said, beyond the diversity of how many colors and options I'm getting every week, how can I also eat with the season that's also going to be in your favor as far as nutrients go? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very important to think about and have awareness around so that you're not, just ingesting the same thing and then hoping your probiotic, gets the rest.
Right. Right.
So one of the things though, I wanted to kind of speak on just because my kids are older now, I heard yours is in college. When they are home and you are in more of a controlled environment, it is easier to help your kids to manage through this. And we can teach them all day long, but it is really, I have found to be challenging when you are 18, 19, 20, and you are living on your own and you're trying to shop and even though they know how to read ingredients, it's like, what has got me thinking is that it needs to be farther than just education in the home. I think that's a great starting point. And I think my kids know how to make good choices and I think they know, but the pressure and the societal factors of like what probably 75 to 80% of the world does conflicts, right, with what they've been taught and know. And it's hard to combat that at that age. I think when you're a little bit older and, you're just more like wise in your skin and all of those things. And so that has got me really going down the rabbit hole that there need to be policy and chain like in place. Like we do not need seed oils. I mean, come on, like that's just ridiculous. We don't need food dyes. I mean, there's no value in that. And seed oils are just going to spike, your inflammation. And if you have SIBO, it all plays into everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, when I was in my little bubble of learning and momming and like could control some of the things, I was like, okay, we're just going to do what we need to do within our family dynamic. And I'm not going to worry about the outside world. And now that my kids are older, I'm like, okay, but the outside world needs to hear this and it matters. And it matters because our kids are going off and they're trying to navigate and manage. And it's really difficult because I remember it being difficult when I had little kids, so it was just that we've created a different lifestyle. But so my whole point in saying that is like, we can teach all day long, but we also have to advocate for change because change needs to come from bottom to top and top to bottom.
Yeah, 100%. And, I'll just say briefly, things are starting to change. I know that some of the laws are actually changing in California where I live about food dyes and additives and things like that.
Which is amazing.
You can talk all day about differing opinions about California politics, but that is one thing that I actually can get on board with. And the thing too is when you compare what our country does with its food supply, and it's a big food science experiment, and getting farther and farther away from whole foods actually, and compare it to, some other, European countries, for instance, and the things that they have banned that we blindly, approve of here. and accept as normal is just really unacceptable in my opinion. So
I
100%
100%.
behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree with that. And I think I have seen several states starting to step up a little bit, and I appreciate, the red 3 being banned. I think that's a great first step. But there's going to have to be a domino effect of all dyes, because
Yeah.
they're all, they all have different impacts, but they're all affecting us in some way, shape, or form, little to big. It doesn't matter. It affects littles because their bodies, smaller and different than ours, but it still affects adults. So,
Yeah.
but again, that's one tiny piece of that giant puzzle. And so we got to take it, but then we're going to have to keep expanding. And I think transparency is key. So if you're going to allow things, at least needs to have a label so people understand what they're actually ingesting. I think that's fair.
So you can make an informed decision whether or not you are going to eat that. Yeah.
Correct. It's not like cigarettes, I mean, there's a warning label on it for a reason, but people still smoke. So I think, again, that's their business. They know, it says it straight up. And if you choose to do that, that's your decision. And I think that can be similar to the food system as we're starting to roll out. Hopefully it will just, be a thing of the past within the decade, which would be awesome. But
wouldn't that be great?
It'll be interesting. I think it would be an interesting experiment to see how the health changes if things, when those things start to roll out. And, I'm very hopeful in this next, and also I wanted to say, you getting on board with California policy. This is a non-Democrat or Republican issue. This is a health crisis for all people across the board, whether you are Republican or Democrat. So, that to me is a non-negotiable. Like there's no politics involved. It's the health, and the health of our world should matter to everybody. I would think. I mean, unless I'm crazy, which
there's
I could
so many things. I kind of feel like looking through the lens of digestive health and SIBO specifically, I see so many things like the seed oils, like you mentioned, being inflammatory, but also gums. Gums are in everything now. And they can, and all the fake sugars that are out there now, because everyone thinks it's cool to go sugar free. And then they're eating these sugar alcohols, which are actually way worse for things like SIBO than actually, just consuming some table sugar, right?
I'm so glad you just said that. I'm so glad we're going to talk about that for a minute, because again, it's just a lot of marketing dupes, and people think they really do. I mean, they think they're doing right. Like they think they're making better choices by choosing the sugar-free or by choosing, the gums, because they don't know what exactly that is. So with that being said, with the fake sugars, how does that impact the gut? Like what happens? What's the signals that go on when your body ingests that?
Yeah. So that's kind of it's sort of
loaded question.
It is. And we can have a whole conversation just about that. But more and more studies actually are coming out, which I'm so grateful for as a gut health coach, because I see so many clients come to me, oh, can I have this soda and it has erythritol? Or, oh, can I have this blah, 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 because it has, sorbitol or whatever, all, the word with the all on the end is the sugar alcohol. And we know now through studies, which, as a gut practitioner, I already knew this, right? When you're consuming those things, it's marking a shift in the microbiome. There's some sort of signaling there. And I don't know the exact mechanism, to go down some scientific rabbit hole, but I do know that there is a shift in the microbiome there. It's not something natural. So your body kind of doesn't know what to do with it. And then it's shifting that balance, that good balance of good bacteria, and then allowing bad bacteria to grow. So there's so many things out there. Actually, I had a client once came to me and said, oh, I found this new probiotic drink and it has, XYZ sugar alcohol. It's sugar-free. Why can't I have it, Jen? Well, let's talk about that. One, it has that sugar alcohol that's going to exacerbate your SIBO symptoms and cause more bloating and gas. But also, do we need to be drinking probiotics? In the SIBO world, having things like kefir and kombucha and stuff like that can be real triggers for people. And I'll swing back around to something we were talking about earlier in supplementation. More probiotics is not a good thing. I see this on stool tests all the time. People coming back with these high levels of commensal bacteria that are becoming pathogenic.
Yes.
If you're taking probiotics and feeling worse, this could be why you're adding fuel to the fire. It's just way too much bacteria in general.
Which is why we say test, don't guess.
Yes,
Because we see these infomercials, we see these commercials that we're all deficient in X, Y, and Z, but you don't know that you're deficient until you actually have some type of a blood, urine, or poop test to figure it out. So invest in that rather than investing in $50 supplements that could be harming you, hurting you, or just not doing anything really. And you're just throwing your money down the toilet. So I love that you brought that up, because I think it's, again, we see a marketing, like we need to have this because, my body's not getting enough, or it's the buzzword, or, we could go down a whole nother show about this, but I just think it's important, just if you leave with nothing else today, to find a practitioner that's going to test beyond just your CBC labs and your hormone labs, because there's so much more that can be tested to really get to root causes. And I think it is an investment, but I think it's a great investment for your health and your wellness, and to educate yourself. And then once you understand some of the things, your lifestyle shifts, and that shifts down to your family too. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And that's the power of being a mom, right? Being a good example to your children about how to make decisions about what they're putting in their body. So,
Yep. Okay. So before we end, because I'm definitely having you back on, because there's a couple of things I really want to dive into a little bit. And I think they're worth its own show. But before we end today, I wanted to ask you, what are some non-negotiables you've created for yourself so that you can show up in your best version with the chaos life will throw you, right? And all of the stress that comes in, because you do have a family behind you that counts on you. And, I think it's important to have those non-negotiables in place.
Yeah. So I'll just briefly say, this took me a long time. It wasn't like I've had this my whole life. And, I'm some prime example of how to have non-negotiables, right? This is something I've learned over time since I've had all these things happen in my life. But I understand now that it has to be a priority, and I'm the only one that's going to be able to take care of myself and to heal myself. That's not anyone else's responsibility. And when I do have responsibility for other people, whether that's my clients or my family members or whoever, I need to be in my best self, right? And in order to do that, my non-negotiables look like my hot bath, right? My quiet time, or things that are creative. So for me right now, it's playing guitar and writing music. And I actually just started voice lessons a few months ago.
I love that.
I've always wanted to do, and we'll see if anything ever comes out of it. But for right now, it's just for me. And this is how I keep my sanity throughout the day, and it's non-negotiable. If there's something else coming up, oops, sorry, it's already blocked on my calendar. This is Jen time.
Yeah. And I love that. And I'm glad you just said that, because I do think, again, we think these non-negotiables or these self-care practices that we're there if there's time. And that has to stop, and it has to be blocked into the time, like in the morning from 9 to 9:30 or whatever your time is. And you need to talk about it so your family knows, talk about it so your clients know, talk about it so that you know, right? And you get on board with that practice, because you get up and you do for everybody else in your family, and then you don't. So I love that. And I think scheduling that on your calendar reinforces the importance to yourself and to everybody else. And I think it's a good way to make it happen. Because if you just say it and you don't schedule it, a lot of times it does not happen. And listen, I'm not perfect. There's days where I'm like, well, I'm not getting to that today. It's like, but for the most part, I know how important those practices are to me. So even if I get off for a day or two, I go back to it, because then I'm like, oh yeah, I remember, like, I need this for my sanity. I need this for my downtime. So, I think it's important. I love those non-negotiables. I think they're really good to have. And no, if you're just starting out and you don't have a non-negotiable, there's no shame in that. Like, just start to understand that it's so necessary and really beneficial for your health, and just pick something small, 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be a 30-hour long thing, but I love that you actually are picking up a new creative skill. Because again, as adults, we forget how to play. Everything is so like dogmatic and so like stressful. And, it's like, but we forget, like, when you were little, what was fun, or, like, what made you find joy, and I think those are things that we have to start, again, putting out into the world, and putting ourselves back in place to have some of those things, to have fun again. And that
I
relieves stress.
wholeheartedly agree with that. I talk to my clients about this all the time. How can we start incorporating more joy activators during your day, even if it's just for 2 minutes?
Yeah. And I tell people, yeah, you're right. You're so right. Because it's like you can live, you can eat the cleanest, you can have all the great labs. But if you're in a toxic relationship, if you have zero joy, you have no spirituality, like your career stinks, you're not going to be healthy. You're still going to have symptoms. You're still going to have things that don't feel good to you. So we call it primary and secondary foods. And the primary food is a new concept, but it's so important. And so I love that you talk to your clients about that because I think it's important. So if you're looking for a gut health specialist or a gut health coach, Jen would be your person. So where can people find you and follow you and kind of start obtaining some of your content?
Yeah, so the easiest way is my website. It's the SIBOcoach.com.
Okay.
And there you can find resources. You can learn about me, what my programs look like. There's also some freebies on there. It's the SIBOcoach.com/resources. Those are my freebies.
Okay.
There's a quiz on there. So if you're curious, if anything we talked about today was like, oh, I wonder if I could have SIBO, take the quiz on there. It's free and it'll give you some insight. And you'll be surprised by how many things aren't on there that are not digestive related. So
Interesting.
just a little plug for that. Yeah.
I love it. And then
where
are
I
you
would say
on
start.
Instagram?
Yeah.
You're on Instagram too.
Instagram, it's funny. I'm kind of having a personal
Detachment.
social media, I don't know if you want to call it crisis or pushback. So I'm actually not on Instagram very often, but when I am, I'm sharing stories and things like that. Yeah.
Perfect. And I love that because again, that's a boundary that's needed because it's time that takes up space. And so again, I love that you're an example of that because especially for this generation coming up, they're so attached to their phones. And, I think it's going to evolve and it will at some point change and shift. But until then, we need people being an example. I'm off, I'm on. I do a lot of preset things or I do stories, but I don't spend all day.
Yeah, I don't do it either. I used to be in the social media, the hustle, but I took myself out after I got hit by that drunk driver. I was like, I think I'm going to reprioritize some things here.
Yeah. I'm really glad you're okay also. I think that's such a scary thing. So I'm glad you're good. All right. So for those of you listening, I will drop everything in the show notes so that you can start to follow Jen. And if you are looking for a coach, there's a contact form that you can reach out to her. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your wisdom. Have a great week, and I will talk to y'all next week.
That episode had so many great takeaways. I hope you feel inspired and more empowered to make small 1% shifts on your wellness journey this week. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you want to leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know how you're going to be implementing these 1% shifts into your life. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with another mama who could use a little wellness love. Want to stay connected? Join me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Check out my website at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com for more resources and grab yourself some freebies while you're there. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to come your way. See y'all next week. Love to y'all.